And thanks for clicking on the Morning Swim Show for this Friday, October 30th, 2009. I'm your host, Peter Busch. Before we end today, we're going to unveil the new poll question of the week. Right now, let's give you the results of this week's question. The question was, will Liu Zige&apos' new 200-fly world record of 2018 stick around as long as Mary T. Maher's 200-fly record did? It was 18 years. And the results? 1/3 of you said yes, it will stick around for that 18 years or more. And 2/3 of you, almost on the money, 66.67%, said no, it will not. So thank you very much for voting in this week's poll. And you know, this week's poll got us talking here at Swimming World. I mean, if 1/3 of you out there think that a record nowadays will last for 18 years, well, I think that maybe we're going to be having a long drought of world records. I mean, this was a very, very fast world record, of course. But anyway, it got us talking here. So for today's show, we're going to bring in Garrett McCaffrey, kind of my split-time partner here on the Morning Swim Show, and talk about what should be our realistic expectations now that these high-tech suits are going away in terms of how many world records we will see. Garrett, welcome back to the show. How you doing?
Doing well, Peter. Thanks for having me.
So here was what I was thinking to start this conversation. We have to process this analytically in terms of, let's go back to the time before the high-tech suits, you know, pre-2008. What were the times then? And keep in mind, some of these times were set in, you know, full-body suits. Sure, they were textile, but still faster type suits than the high-tech suits. So, for example, the 200-fly women's world record was 2:05.4 before the high-tech suits were introduced. So if we start there, and then think about what is the natural process throughout history, you know, a couple tenths here, a couple tenths there for world records being broken. I mean, how long would it take before we get to a 2018 again, through this natural process? So I'm not surprised, actually. I might be in that camp that say this will last as long as Mary T. Maher's record. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think you have to go back even further than that 2054, because if we're going to talk about pre-technology suits, that 2054 by Jessica Schipper was still a full-body suit, and you have to keep that in mind. But like you said, this is kind of an interesting case because that 2054 was just inching below Mary T. Maher's record that was around for 18 years. And there are events that stand up like that, and there are events that it just seems like every other year that record is getting lower and lower. I think a 201 fits into the category that at this point when we're looking forward, and all we can do is guess, but you look at a 206 in the 200 IM, you look at a 20-point in the 50 freestyle, and you're saying there is no way that somebody without this new technology is going to be able to come in and beat those times. But we had an interesting interview yesterday with Tyler McGill, and his attitude was, yeah, we think that all of the NCAA records are still in play. And as a swimmer, what else are you supposed to think? If you're not going for best times always, then what's the point in going after it? I mean, that is ultimately the goal, is it not?
Okay, I agree with how Tyler McGill broke that down, because I think that has to be the attitude of the coaches and the swimmers that, hey, we're shooting for best times. However, I'm guessing that if you speak to them man-to-man, woman-to-woman, that they'll say, you know, I'm ready to go a little bit slower, but I'm still going to be happy if I go a great time. But there are a couple of exceptions here to the theory I was breaking down that, you know, we have to go back to where the record was. I mean, of course, you got to take into account amazing swimmers that are once-in-a-generation swimmers like Michael Phelps. I was thinking about the men's long course 200 freestyle, for example. I mean, I remember for years and years it was Lamberti, you know, with 1:45.6. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I mean, obviously we're 4 seconds past that now, maybe 5 seconds in history. I don't think, you know, it's unrealistic to think that Phelps and, you know, Paul Biederman, those guys will be, you know, well under 1:45 again when they start swimming in textile suits. But I'm going to be shocked if they're even within a second or so of the suit of the times that they've set in these high-tech suits. So I get the feeling like there's, you know, the talk from swimmers and coaches is not ready to fully acknowledge, at least on the record, that these times are probably going to be untouchable for a while. I mean, that's what history is telling us.
I think the coaches and swimmers have to kind of take that mentality, and it's our job as the journalists and the people who are watching the sport to analyze it realistically. As a coach and a swimmer, you want to take advantage of this because the mind is open. You know, the 4-minute mile was physically impossible until somebody did it, and then 70 people did it. As a coach, you want to take advantage of that psychological factor, and you want to keep that attitude of, yeah, we can still do this. Somebody physically did that. There was still a person in that suit that went that time. And I agree with you, Peter. I don't see anybody getting to a 142-200 freestyle anytime soon without those tech suits, just because of the way that race breaks down. And Tyler talked yesterday about taking what we learned from these suits and implementing them and trying to recreate that with just the human body. And in a 200 freestyle, that seems so difficult to do, to maintain that great line and that physical
It's almost efficiency.
Buoyancy. Yeah, up in the water at the end of a 200 freestyle. Those suits, without a doubt, gave you an advantage at the end of a race like that. But sports are amazing things, and I hear what you're saying, and I appreciate the realistic point of view, but I guess even as a fan a little bit, I see it happening this summer. I see some world records going down this summer, whether that be the 1500, which remained untouched and goes back to the pre-shiny suits and the polyurethane that we're talking about, or if it's a record like a Michael Phelps being able to go 149 and reach his full potential in a 200 butterfly, which I feel like he still hasn't had a race where all of the pieces came together for him. At the Olympics, his goggles fell off. There were some questions about how in shape he was after just 6 months back in the pool when it came to Rome. So I think that we are going to see some world records. Are we going to see the onslaught that we've seen over the past year? Absolutely not. There's no way. There's no doubt that these suits are an advantage, and a big advantage at that. I'm not going to ever try to argue that. But I think that there's some resiliency, and we're blessed with one of the greatest athletes and most dominant athletes of all time in our sport right now. So that could cure our hangover quickly this 2010 season.
Yeah, and just again to be clear, I fully acknowledge that swimmers will eventually catch up. I just think it's going to take longer than what a lot of people are publicly acknowledging. I mean, obviously there will be a day when these times are broken once again. It just happens. I mean, the times are that's evolution. I just think these suits gave such an advantage, were such a performance enhancer, that I could easily see some of these records sticking around for a decade or longer. Not all of them. There will be some here and there that go down, and maybe that will be more exciting because obviously they became, just something to barely clap at last summer in Rome. But it's going to be fun, and this is some food for thought for everyone. We're trying to bring up interesting points and be a little provocative because this is going to be, I think, the topic of the upcoming year. It's just watching the difference that the suits made. And let's just get it on everybody's minds for right now. So thank you, Garrett.
No problem. Thank you, Peter. Let's get to the next poll question.
All right, let's do it. Speaking of fast swimming, next weekend is the World Cup stop in Moscow. Now, swimmers will still be able to wear the high-tech suits, as we saw in Durban, South Africa a couple weeks ago. Many of them still were. And there were 4 world records, by our count, broken at that stop on the World Cup Series. Now, keep in mind, this Moscow stop probably going to have some faster swimmers. It's in Europe. Probably the European swimmers more likely to attend, try and make some money. So, with all that in mind, the poll question of the week: how many world records will be broken at the Moscow stop on the World Cup Tour? We've broken it up into 3 categories here: 4 or less, 5 to 8, or more than 8. You can go to swimmingworld.com and cast your vote. And that is it for the show today. Have a nice weekend. I'm Peter Busch, reminding you to keep your head down at the finish.